I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Buzz Aldrin once described a strange flying object drifting across the stars. But the remarkable thing is that the crew avoided reporting it because they could not explain it. When he returned from the moon, he was no longer the same. The mission was called the greatest victory of mankind. Years later, he burst into tears in an interview and said, "The moon is not what people think it is." That reaction raises difficult questions about what he really experienced in that quiet world. What did Buzz Aldrin see on the moon? Buzz Aldrin became the second man to walk on the moon, and people admired him as a talented engineer who always stayed calm during difficult moments. His interviews, however, began to show a different side of him because his voice sometimes shook when he spoke about the landing, and his reactions often changed without warning. Reporters noticed that he paused in the middle of certain memories as if he was trying to reach for something he could not fully describe. This contrast between the confident public hero and the quiet private man made many wonder what he brought back from that silent place. The story of Apollo 11 adds even more weight because the mission depended on a massive team of 400,000 workers and a rocket that had to perform perfectly. The Saturn V took 3 astronauts into space, while the entire world waited to see history unfold. Every switch and connection mattered because a small failure could put the crew in danger before they ever reached the moon. The pressure surrounding the launch created a sense of risk that never truly left the mission. It leads to a difficult question that still hangs over Buzz Aldrin's memories. What happened during that journey that glory could not erase? Apollo 11 began its journey with a force that shook the ground like a living creature waking from a long sleep, and the astronauts felt that power press through their suits as the Saturn V climbed into the sky. The rocket carried them higher while the engines released flames bright enough to turn night into morning, and the vibrations rolled through the cabin until their bodies adjusted to the constant movement. The noise was overwhelming, yet it marked the start of a mission that would push them farther than any human had traveled before. When the first stage separated, the cabin changed from violent shaking to a steady hum that filled the air around them like a low heartbeat. The astronauts watched pieces of the rocket drift away while the spacecraft continued to rise toward the edge of Earth's atmosphere. The pressure on their chests slowly faded, and for the first time since launch, they could breathe without feeling the weight of gravity pull them down. The mission reached space, and the world they knew began to fall behind them. As the spacecraft settled into its path toward the moon, the crew started the long 3-day crossing through deep space. The Earth shrank from a giant sphere into a glowing marble that floated against a black ocean, and that view reminded them how small their home was when compared to the empty distance around them. The moon appeared as a faint curve at first, but with every passing hour, it grew brighter and sharper in the window until its surface filled their view. During the journey, the astronauts followed a strict schedule of checks, navigation updates, and routine observations. The hum of the life support systems became the soundtrack of their days, and the stillness inside the cabin created a quiet space that none of them had felt before. The spacecraft carried them forward with smooth and constant motion, and each crew member knew that they were moving toward a place that no human footsteps had touched. After 76 hours, Apollo 11 slipped into lunar orbit, and the crew watched the moon stretch across the entire window in front of them. Craters and ridges passed beneath them, and the surface looked closer than they expected because the lack of atmosphere removed any haze. The view felt surreal because every detail appeared sharp and unfiltered, and the astronauts realized they were circling a world that did not resemble anything they had seen on Earth. The most unsettling moment came when the spacecraft crossed behind the Moon and communication with Earth vanished without warning. There were no voices from Houston, no signals from antennas, and no sound except for the quiet inside the cabin. For the first time in history, 3 people were completely separated from every other living human, and that silence made the cabin feel even smaller. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, and the crew waited for the signal to return while the spacecraft continued along its path. Buzz Aldrin later said that this silence created a strange awareness inside him because he understood how far they had traveled and how fragile their connection to Earth truly was. The moment behind the Moon became a reminder that they were exploring a world that held no sound, no air, and no sign of life. It was a place defined by emptiness, and the astronauts felt that truth more strongly with every second of radio blackout. As the signal returned, the crew prepared for the next phase of the mission. Yet the question remains: was this the first moment Aldrin realized the Moon was not the world he expected? Armstrong and Aldrin moved into the lunar module called Eagle, and the small cabin immediately changed the atmosphere around them because everything inside felt tighter and more fragile than the command module. Collins stayed alone in orbit while the 2 men prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission. Their helmets reflected the dim light of the controls, and for a moment, neither of them spoke as they checked their suits and instruments. The world watched from a distance, but inside the cabin, the only sounds were the steady clicks of switches and the soft static of the radio. When Eagle separated from the command module, the descent engine activated and pushed them toward the surface with a slow but steady force. The cabin shook slightly as the system adjusted to its new mode, and both astronauts focused on the data flowing across the screens. They had practiced this moment countless times on Earth, yet this time felt different because failure meant that no one could rescue them. Every movement inside the cabin mattered, and each number on the display carried a warning that could not be ignored. The calm rhythm of the descent changed without warning when a loud alarm flashed across the guidance computer. The unexpected warning stunned both men because the system had not predicted overloads during this phase of the mission. Engineers in Houston immediately searched for the meaning of the code, and their voices filled the communication line with concern. The pressure inside the cabin increased as the seconds passed, and the astronauts continued monitoring the controls while waiting for instructions. Mission Control finally confirmed that they could continue, yet the confidence inside the Eagle did not fully return because the alarms continued to appear. Armstrong kept one hand near the manual controls, and Aldrin called out altitude numbers with a steady and controlled voice. His tone remained calm, but the tension in the cabin felt sharp because each reading brought them closer to the surface. The view outside the small windows changed from empty darkness to a gray and uneven landscape that looked more alien than anything they had ever seen. The computer struggled again, and Armstrong made the decision to switch into manual mode. The ground below them was filled with boulders, and the landing target was not safe because the surface was far rougher than the maps had suggested. Aldrin read out velocity and fuel levels quickly while Armstrong guided the craft toward a flat area that appeared at the edge of their approach. The seconds raced forward, and the remaining fuel dropped lower than anyone expected. The tension reached its breaking point when Mission Control announced that the Eagle had less than 30 seconds of fuel left. The warning filled the cabin like a final countdown, and both astronauts knew that a single mistake would send them crashing into the surface. Armstrong kept the craft level with precise movements, and Aldrin continued reporting altitude until the surface seemed close enough to touch. The descent engine fought gravity with fading strength, and the world held its breath while waiting for an answer. Then Armstrong's voice broke through the radio with a calm that surprised everyone listening. "The Eagle has landed." The words triggered celebrations across the globe, and crowds on every continent reacted with cheers and tears. For the first time in history, humans had reached another world and survived the landing. The mission became a symbol of unity for millions of people who watched from their homes. Inside the Eagle, however, the moment felt heavier and quieter than the world imagined. The two astronauts sat in stillness while the dust settled beneath them, and the silence pressed against them like a reminder that this world had never known life. They stared at a landscape untouched by creation, and the weight of that truth filled the small cabin. It leads to the question that still lingers today. Why did the joy outside never reach the two men inside? Buzz Aldrin expected the first step onto the moon to feel like the reward for years of training. Yet the moment his boots touched the surface, the scene around him felt far stranger than he imagined. The ground was covered in gray dust that swallowed every footprint with sharp edges that refused to soften. The sunlight hit the surface with an intensity that felt almost harsh because there was no atmosphere to filter its brightness. The horizon looked close enough to reach with a few steps, and the sky was an endless black that held no stars, no clouds, and no sign of time. It was a view that did not resemble anything on Earth. Aldrin moved slowly, testing the ground with gentle steps while his heartbeat echoed inside the suit. He expected to feel excitement, yet a deep stillness settled around him as though the world had been locked in silence for ages. Each step created a crisp mark in the dust, and the lack of wind made the prints look permanent, as if they would remain long after he was gone. The landscape felt untouched by life, and the total absence of sound made the moment even more unsettling. Aldrin felt as if he had stepped into a place that had never welcomed anything living. The sharp shadows across the ground added to the strange atmosphere because they formed perfect lines that seemed almost unreal. The surface looked flat in some places and dangerously uneven in others, and every detail appeared sharper than anything he had seen through photographs. The moon offered no soft colors or familiar shapes, and the silence pressed against him like a weight that could not be ignored. This world had no breeze to carry away the dust and no air to hold any warmth, and the truth of that emptiness settled inside his thoughts. When Aldrin looked up, he saw Earth hanging above the horizon like a glowing sphere made of blue and white. The planet looked small from that distance, and its delicate colors stood in sharp contrast to the gray world beneath his feet. The view created a sudden awareness inside him about the fragility of life and the narrow border between home and the void. He later said the sight made him understand how temporary every human moment truly was, because everything familiar existed inside that tiny glowing circle far above him. The phrase, "magnificent desolation," came to him as he tried to describe the landscape because it held a strange mix of beauty and loneliness. The surface stretched in every direction with no trees, no water, and no motion, yet the scale felt majestic in a way that overwhelmed his senses. The desolation was complete, but the view had a type of wonder that only seemed possible in a world untouched for billions of years. Aldrin realized he was standing somewhere older than any mountain on Earth, and the quiet around him seemed timeless. As he walked, a thought grew inside him that he later struggled to put into words. He felt as if life itself had shrunk inside him, not from fear, but from the realization that humans were small compared to the vastness around him. The moon did not offer comfort or welcome, and its silence echoed through him in a way no training manual had ever prepared him for. He understood that they were visitors to a world that existed long before humanity and would continue long after. The experience left him with a question he never fully answered. What did he sense on that barren surface that words could never explain? Buzz Aldrin returned to Earth as a global hero, and cities across the United States prepared celebrations that stretched for miles. Parades filled the streets with cheering crowds while bands played music and reporters pushed forward with microphones to capture every word he said. He received medals from national leaders, and children waved flags as he passed by in open cars. The world treated him as a symbol of courage, yet inside, he felt a kind of distance that no applause could close. The excitement around him created a storm of noise, but none of it sounded real after the silence of the moon. During interviews, Aldrin tried to describe the landing with the same confidence he showed during the mission, but his thoughts drifted more often than before because memories kept pulling him back to the stillness he could not forget. Friends noticed that he paused at strange moments, and his eyes wandered as if his mind had traveled somewhere far beyond the room. At parties, he spoke less and listened more, and people around him realized he was present in body but not always in spirit. The shift in his behavior surprised many because the world expected him to be full of energy after such an achievement. As days turned into weeks, Aldrin found it harder to reconnect with ordinary routines because simple errands felt strange after experiencing a world without air, sound, or life. He once said that it was hard to return to grocery stores after seeing infinity, and that single sentence revealed the emotional conflict he carried. The moon had changed the way he looked at everything familiar, and he struggled to ease back into a life that now felt too small. The silence he met on the lunar surface seemed to echo through his thoughts, even when he tried to focus on everyday tasks. The weight of that experience began to grow as he spent more nights awake, replaying the landing in his mind. He remembered the dust beneath his boots, the black sky above him, and the fragile earth hanging like a distant lantern. These memories did not frighten him, yet they created a heavy feeling that he could not shake. Some nights he sat alone, staring out a window because the quiet felt closer to the moon than anything around him. Friends later shared that they found him lost in thought, as though he was reaching for something he left on that distant world. As time passed, depression started to take hold, and Aldrin described it as a weight that followed him everywhere. He felt as if the moon never truly let him go, and the emotional impact of the mission continued to press on him long after the celebrations ended. The world saw him as an explorer who helped win the space race, but inside he carried a sense of loss that he could not easily explain. This contrast created two versions of himself, and both struggled to exist together. One side was the engineer who still loved science because it gave him structure and purpose. The other was the philosopher who feared what the moon had shown him because the experience revealed how small human life could feel when compared to the endless darkness around it. These two sides pushed against each other, and Aldrin worked to balance them while pretending to be the confident figure people expected him to be. The conflict within him sparked a question that has followed his story ever since. Was Aldrin haunted by what he saw or by what he understood? Modern science began revisiting the moon decades after the Apollo missions, and researchers soon realized that the data left behind still carried secrets no one had noticed before. New technology allowed scientists to process old recordings with fresh precision, and artificial intelligence uncovered patterns that earlier computers could not detect. Each discovery added another piece to a picture that slowly shifted the way experts understood the moon. This new era of research brought answers that sounded surprisingly close to the emotions Buzz Aldrin had described years earlier. One of the first breakthroughs came from the seismometers that the Apollo astronauts placed on the surface. These instruments recorded tiny vibrations caused by meteoroid impacts and environmental changes, and when modern teams analyzed the data again, they discovered something unexpected. Instead of fading quickly, The vibrations lasted for almost an hour, and the surface seemed to echo the energy like a giant bell. This behavior suggested that the moon had a very unusual internal structure, and the solid, simple model used for decades was no longer enough to explain what scientists observed. The discovery reopened questions many believed had been settled long ago. Another surprising clue emerged when researchers compared the chemical signatures of lunar rocks to materials found deep inside the Earth. Advanced isotope testing showed that the rocks matched Earth's interior almost perfectly, and this result strongly supported the theory that the moon formed from Earth after a massive ancient collision. The moon was not captured from space, and it was not the product of random cosmic debris. It was born from the same material as our planet, and its history was tied to ours from the beginning. The idea changed how people saw the night sky because the moon became more than a companion. It became a fragment of Earth that had drifted outward. New satellite missions added even more layers to this changing story. India's Chandrayaan-3 lander and NASA's orbiters found tiny glass beads buried in the soil, and inside these beads were traces of ancient water preserved for billions of years. The water likely came from the moon's interior, and its presence suggested that chemical energy had once moved through the crust. The discovery hinted that the moon had been far more active in its early life than scientists once believed, and its surface had changed through processes that were still not fully understood. Artificial intelligence uncovered additional mysteries hidden within the lunar samples. By scanning minerals that Apollo astronauts brought home, AI detected faint magnetic patterns that pointed to a molten core in the distant past. The moon, which many assumed had always been cold and silent, once generated its own magnetic field just like Earth. This finding added to the growing image of a world that had lived through dramatic transformations before becoming the still landscape Aldrin stepped onto. Radar studies soon expanded the mystery even further. Deep scans of the far side revealed massive metal structures buried under the crust, and many scientists suggested that these formations were the remains of enormous ancient impacts. The metal masses stretched across distances larger than some mountains on Earth, and their existence showed how violent the moon's early history truly was. These discoveries painted a picture of a world shaped by heat, pressure, and constant change. As researchers combined all the evidence, the conclusion became clear. The moon had once been active, alive, and evolving, and it shared the same origin as the planet humans call home. It was not a dead rock drifting in darkness. It was a part of Earth's story, shaped by the same forces that shaped us. This brings us to a final question that echoes through Aldrin's memories. Did he sense this long before science proved it? Buzz Aldrin's emotional moment now carries a different meaning, because modern discoveries show that the moon is not a silent rock drifting without purpose. Instead, it is a record of Earth's early history, shaped by heat, impact, and the same forces that once formed our own world. His reaction revealed how deeply the experience changed him, and the new science suggests that his feelings were not simply personal. They reflected a truth that humanity had not yet learned. His journey influenced the way NASA prepares astronauts for long missions, because his honesty made the agency pay attention to the emotional weight of exploration. The silence he met on the moon helped create new psychological programs, and these programs now support crews who will travel farther than Apollo ever reached. Aldrin showed that exploring space challenges the mind as much as the body. His story inspired young scientists and students who saw him as someone brave enough to speak about the cost of discovery. He taught them that the moon is not only a destination, but a reminder of how fragile human life is when seen from a distance. His tears became a warning about humility, and they continue to guide future explorers as they look toward new horizons. What do you think his tears were trying to tell us?